He was the man this city feared to name out loud, the kind of man who walked into rooms and made powerful people go quiet. But on a frozen Tuesday afternoon, standing at an ordinary crosswalk with exhaust fumes rising around him, Kang Ji-hwan stopped breathing. Because the one woman who ever made him human was standing 10 feet away, visibly pregnant, pretending she had not seen him. She was carrying his child, and she was walking away. If you want to find out what happens when the most dangerous man in the city falls to his knees for a woman who has already decided he is not worth the risk, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The light was red. That was the only reason he stopped. Ji-hwan had not slept in 31 hours. His jaw carried the tight, locked-down set of a man who had been clenching his teeth through a conversation he had not wanted to finish, and his overcoat was the kind of expensive that no longer impressed him. Charcoal wool, hand-stitched lapels, a collar that did nothing against the wind cutting off the river 3 blocks east. His driver was idling half a block back, waiting for the light to change so they could swing around to the parking structure beneath the Vantage building, where Ji-hwan had a meeting in 11 minutes with 2 men he did not trust and 1 accountant he trusted even less. He was thinking about numbers. He was always thinking about numbers lately, the kind that appeared in ledgers that did not officially exist, and in conversations that were never recorded, and in the careful, deliberate silences between sentences when a subordinate was trying to tell him something without actually saying it. Numbers and silence, that was the architecture of the life he had built. And he had built it so thoroughly, so completely, that most days he could not remember what existed before it. He was thinking about none of this when he saw her. She was across the intersection, standing at the corner near the flower cart that had been there since Ji-hwan was 22 years old, back when this neighborhood was rougher and the cart was run by an old man who never asked questions. The old man was gone now. The cart was run by his daughter. Some things changed and some things stayed, and Ji-hwan had long since stopped thinking about which category he fell into. Nia Brooks stood with one hand resting on the strap of her bag and the other. He noticed it before he noticed anything else, before he noticed her face or her coat or the new way she wore her hair. Her other hand rested low and instinctive and protective against the front of her coat, against the unmistakable curve beneath it. The air went out of him, not dramatically, not the way it happened in films where a man staggers back and grabs a lamppost and the camera lingers on his face while the music swells. It left him the way heat leaves a room when someone opens a window in January, quietly, completely, and all at once. One moment he was a man who had been running an empire for 11 years without flinching, and the next he was standing on a sidewalk with his hands at his sides, unable to produce a single coherent thought. She was pregnant. She was very pregnant. 6 months, maybe more. He did not know. He was not a man who calculated these things. But the evidence was undeniable, and it rewrote every assumption he had been carrying since the morning 14 months ago when she had signed her name on the last of the divorce papers and walked out of the attorney's office without looking back. The light changed. People moved. The intersection filled with bodies in coats and scarves. Everyone pointed somewhere with purpose. And Ji-hwan stood completely still in the middle of it while the city streamed around him like water around a stone. Nia had seen him. He knew because she went very still for exactly 2 seconds. Not frozen, not panicked, just still in the particular way of someone who has prepared for a moment and is now discovering that preparation and readiness are not the same thing. Then she straightened. She pulled her bag strap higher on her shoulder. She stepped off the curb with the careful, deliberate gait of a woman who has learned to move as though the ground beneath her cannot be trusted. And she walked into the crosswalk moving at an angle that would carry her across the street and past him and away before he had any reasonable opportunity to speak. He spoke anyway. Naya. One word. Her name in his mouth sounded like something he had not said in a long time, which was accurate because he had not. He had not said it to anyone. He had not even said it to himself in the dark at 3 a.m. when he woke up in a bed that was too large and too quiet, because saying it was the one indulgence he had decided he could not afford. She did not stop. Her pace changed, a fraction, barely perceptible, and she lifted her chin by about half an inch, which was the Nia Brooks equivalent of building a wall, and she kept walking. He caught up to her in 4 strides. Nia. Don't! Her voice was flat. Not angry. Anger would have been easier, would have given him something to press against. Just flat, like a door that has been locked from the inside and reinforced. She did not look at him. She was looking at the far curb, calculating the distance. I don't have anything to say to you. I'm not asking you to say anything. Then why are you following me? I'm walking next to you. Same thing. They reached the curb. She turned north without hesitation, as though she had somewhere specific to be, which Ji Huan suspected was not entirely true and was instead a navigational strategy. Keep moving. Stay in public. Do not give him a corner or a doorway or any enclosed space that might function as a conversation. He matched her pace. His coat was heavier than hers and his legs were longer and the matching was effortless, which he understood was not the point. How long? He said. She didn't answer. Nia, how long? How long what? You know what I'm asking. She stopped. She stopped abruptly enough that a man behind them nearly walked into her, muttered something irritated, and veered around. She turned and looked at Ji Huan directly for the first time, and the thing that hit him was not the pregnancy. He had already absorbed that, was still absorbing it, would probably be absorbing it for the rest of his life. The thing that hit him was how tired she looked. Not tired the way people looked after a bad night. Tired the way people looked after months of carrying something heavy without putting it down. 7 months, she said. She said it the way she might have said it to a stranger who asked what time it was. Factual, uninflected, stripped of every emotion she had presumably once attached to it. 7 months and 3 weeks, if you want to be exact. He did the arithmetic without meaning to. 7 months and 3 weeks meant she had known before the divorce was finalized. She had known for weeks, possibly longer, before she walked out of that attorney's office. He did not say this. The wind off the river found them on the open sidewalk and pushed between them. And he did not say the thing that was climbing the back of his throat because he understood, in the one functional part of his brain that was still operating, that accusation was not what this moment required. Are you... He stopped, reorganized. Are you all right? Something moved across her face. It was not warmth, exactly. It was more like the expression of a person who has spent a long time expecting the wrong question and has been briefly, uncomfortably surprised by a different one. I'm fine, she said. You're living alone. You don't know that. Are you? The pause that followed was its own answer. She pulled her coat tighter with the hand that wasn't holding her bag, a gesture that was more habit than function. The coat was already as tight as it would go around her. And she looked past him at the middle distance, at a point somewhere over his left shoulder where the answer might be located if she could just find it. I have support, she said finally. I have people. Who? That's not your business anymore. The child... Don't. The flatness in her voice sharpened into something with an edge. Don't do that. Don't stand on a sidewalk and suddenly decide you have a claim because you can see the math. I'm not claiming anything. I'm asking if you're safe. I was safe the entire time you weren't in my life. I managed. He looked at her. He looked at the smudges beneath her eyes that makeup had not quite covered, and the way her shoulders sat. Forward, slightly, the way a person's shoulders sat when they had been guarding themselves for a long time, and the posture had become structural. He looked at her hands, the one on the bag strap and the one against her stomach, and he thought about the 14 months he had spent believing that distance was protection, that removing himself from her life was the most generous thing he could offer her. He was beginning to understand that he had been catastrophically wrong. Let me walk you home, he said. Absolutely not. Nia, Ji Huan. She said his name the way he had said hers, with the weight of someone who has been practicing not saying it. I spent 14 months rebuilding my life without you in it. I did not miss you every single day so I could stand on a sidewalk and pretend that you showing up means something different this time. So please. She exhaled. The breath misted in the cold. Please let me get home. He stepped back. One step, deliberate, giving her the space she was asking for. She watched him do it. She watched him with the careful attention of someone who has learned not to believe the gesture, who requires the follow-through before the gesture means anything. And something in her expression shifted just slightly, not softening, not yet, but registering. The baby, he said, is the baby. Healthy. The word came out quieter than the others. Everything is fine. She's fine. She. The pronoun landed in his chest like a stone dropping into still water, the ripples spreading outward before he could stop them. A daughter. He was going to have a daughter, apparently, and he had not known, and the not knowing had not been his choice, but he also could not pretend it had been entirely circumstance. He had made himself unreachable. He had constructed the distance carefully and deliberately because he had told himself it was the honorable thing, and she had walked through that distance and taken his child with her and built a life alone in a city where someone was apparently watching her closely enough to know her every movement, and he had been on the other side of the wall he built, running numbers and ledgers that didn't exist, and none of it had protected anyone. "Let me walk you home," he said again. Not a demand, not even quite a request, more like a man who has run out of other things to offer. Nia looked at him for a long moment. The flower cart was behind him, half a block back, and the city moved around them with indifferent efficiency, and the cold was getting worse. "One condition," she said. "Anything. Don't make promises." Her eyes were steady on his. "Don't tell me things have changed. Don't tell me you're different. Just walk. That's all." "Okay." "I mean it. One word about what happened between us, and I flag down that cab and you don't follow it." "I understand." She studied him for another 3 seconds, calculating something he didn't have the equation for, and then she turned and started walking. He fell into step beside her. He kept his hands in his pockets and his mouth shut, and he walked, and the city moved around them, and that was what it was. She had been living in a building on Crestline, 11 blocks from where he'd found her, in a neighborhood that was neither dangerous nor particularly comfortable. The kind of neighborhood that existed in the middle distance between what you needed and what you could afford, where the grocery store was 3 blocks in one direction, and the park was 4 blocks in another, and the building superfixed things eventually if you waited long enough. The kind of neighborhood Nia had described to him once, years ago, when they were still figuring each other out. She had grown up adjacent to neighborhoods like this, not in them, and she had told him that there was a specific texture to streets like these, a realness that the polished blocks further south had engineered out. He had bought her an apartment in one of those polished blocks when they were married. She had been grateful and uncomfortable in equal measure, and he had not understood that discomfort then the way he was beginning to understand it now. The building was 6 stories, brick, with a buzzer panel that had 3 non-functional buttons and a front door that required you to pull and push simultaneously in a specific sequence to get it open. Nia performed this sequence without thinking about it, which meant she had been doing it long enough for it to become automatic, which meant she had been here a while. He filed that away. She turned at the door. He had stopped at the base of the 3 steps that led up to it, maintaining the distance, as he had maintained it the entire 11 blocks, close enough to be present, far enough to give her room. "Thank you," she said. She said it stiffly, as though the courtesy required effort. "Do you have food?" he said. She blinked. "What?" "In the apartment. Do you have food, groceries?" "That is not a yes or no question." She stared at him. He watched the calculation happen behind her eyes. The assessment of whether this was controlling behavior dressed up as concern, whether the old patterns were reasserting themselves, whether she could afford to answer honestly. "I was going to order something," she said, which answered his question without answering it. "I'll send something over," he said, "from the Thai place on Merchant, if it's still there." "You used to—" He stopped himself. She had said no promises, no history. He recalibrated. "I'll send food. You don't have to let it in if you don't want it." She looked at him from the top of those 3 steps, and the expression on her face was the most complicated thing he had seen in 14 months. More complicated than any negotiation, any threat assessment, any moment in any room where powerful people sat across from each other with competing intentions. It was the face of a woman who was very tired and very proud, and very close to the edge of a decision she had not yet made. "Okay," she said. She went inside. The door required the push-pull sequence, and she performed it without looking back. And then she was gone, and Jihuan stood on the sidewalk outside her building in the cold and did not move for a long moment. His phone buzzed. His driver, wondering about the meeting. He put the phone back in his pocket without looking at it. The meeting could wait. The Thai food arrived 40 minutes later. He had called the restaurant himself, which surprised them, because Kang Ji-hwan did not typically make calls about pad see ew and spring rolls. But tonight he did, And he stood outside her building while he did it and gave the address carefully and added a container of the hot and sour soup because she had always been cold, always, even in summer, and he had learned that in the second month of knowing her and never unlearned it. He did not go up. He made that clear to the delivery driver. Leave it with the buzzer, ring unit 4. Do not wait for a tip because the tip was already handled. He stood across the street where she couldn't see him from her window if she was checking, and he waited until the driver had come and gone, and then he stood there a little longer in the cold. He was trying to construct a thought that made sense of what had happened this afternoon, and he was failing, because the only thought that kept surfacing was the same one, over and over, stripped of everything except its essential truth. She had been pregnant for 7 months, and he had not known. He had not known because she had decided not to tell him. She had decided not to tell him because she believed, with enough conviction to carry the weight of it alone for 7 months in a building with a broken buzzer panel, that his world would destroy their child. And the unbearable thing, the thing he could not argue his way around, was that she was not wrong. She had not been wrong about any of it. Not about the empire, not about the danger, not about the careful, systematic way that his world had a habit of consuming the people adjacent to it. She had watched it happen to others during their marriage, the associates who lost family members, the subordinates whose personal lives became leverage, the quiet, chronic erosion of safety that came from being connected to a man like him. She had watched all of that, and she had made her calculation, and she had chosen her child over the risk of him. He could not be angry at her for it. He was not angry. What he was something he didn't have a clean word for, a specific grinding combination of grief and accountability that sat in his sternum like a stone that had been there long enough to become load-bearing. His phone buzzed again. He ignored it again. A third time. Different number. One of his lieutenants, a man named Park, who handled the Eastern Territory and who did not call unless something was wrong. Ji-hwan answered. "Talk," he said. Park talked. It took 40 seconds. Ji-hwan listened without expression, looking up at the 6th floor of Nia's building. She was on the 4th, but the 6th was where the light was on. And when Park finished, Ji-hwan said 2 words and ended the call. He stood on the sidewalk in the cold for a moment longer. Then he started walking. The next morning he came back. He was not certain he would. He had spent the night in his office. Not uncommon, he kept a couch there and a change of clothes, and the particular kind of sleeplessness that his life generated rarely improved when transferred to his actual apartment. And he had been sitting at his desk at 6:45 in the morning, looking at the same document for 40 minutes without processing any of it, when he picked up his phone and texted a number he had not texted in 14 months. "I know you don't want to hear from me. I'm not asking for anything. I just want to know you ate." He put the phone face down on the desk. He picked it up again 11 minutes later. Her response was 3 words. The soup was good. He put the phone down again. He looked at the document. He thought about the 3 words and what they had cost her to send, what they represented in terms of the geography of the wall she had built. And then he made himself stop thinking about it and look at the document, which was a financial report he needed to understand before a meeting at 10. At 7:30, he sent another text. "Can I bring breakfast?" The response took 22 minutes, which he spent making and discarding 14 different decisions about whether he should pull his car around and simply wait. "Not today, maybe tomorrow." "Okay," he sent back. "You're not going to push," she replied. It was not quite a question. "No." Another pause. Shorter this time. "Okay." Tomorrow came. He brought breakfast, coffee from the place on Arden that did it the way she liked. Dark and slightly bitter with 1 spoon of brown sugar, which was not how most people took it, but had apparently been her preference since college. He remembered this with an accuracy that embarrassed him slightly when he examined it. He also brought pastries from the Korean bakery 2 neighborhoods over, the kind with the sweet red bean that she had discovered during their marriage, and developed an attachment to that outlasted most of their other points of connection. She let him in. Not immediately, not without reservation. She buzzed him up and then met him at the apartment door rather than the building entrance, and she stood in the doorway while she assessed him, which he accepted without comment. He handed her the coffee and the bag of pastries, and she accepted them with the careful neutrality of a person who is reserving all judgment. The apartment was small. He registered this without letting his face register it. 3 rooms, practically speaking, with a kitchen that was also part of the living space and a bathroom and a single bedroom, and he understood that the spare room that should have been there was not there because she had not been able to afford it, or had not wanted to afford it, or both. There was a crib in one corner, partially assembled, the instruction booklet sitting on top of it with a coffee ring on the cover that told him it had been sitting there for at least a few days. There were things on the walls that were hers, photographs from before, art prints she had always liked, a calendar on the kitchen wall with appointments marked in her handwriting, prenatal visits, dates, a reminder 2 weeks out circled twice. There were also things that spoke to the reality of her situation, in ways that settled in his chest with uncomfortable precision. A stack of medical paperwork on the counter, a notebook with insurance information, a second-hand rocking chair in the corner that had been painted white, but where the original color showed through in places. She had done all of this alone. "Stop looking," she said. He turned from the rocking chair. I'm not... You're cataloging. I can see you doing it." She set the coffee on the kitchen counter and opened the pastry bag. "You always cataloged rooms. It's a habit. I used to watch you do it at parties." "I'm not judging." "I know you're not. You're calculating." She pulled out one of the pastries and looked at it with an expression that was almost briefly a smile. "You remembered. You talked about them constantly." "I did not constantly." She stopped. She took a bite. She looked at the middle distance in the way of someone who has been ambushed by a small, involuntary pleasure and is deciding whether to acknowledge it. "These are very good." "Yeah." She looked at him. He was standing near the door, coat still on, the way a person stood when they understood that their presence was provisional and that ease was something that had to be earned back in increments so small they were almost imperceptible. "Sit down," she said. Not warmly, exactly, but without the edge she'd had yesterday. He sat. They did not talk about the pregnancy that morning. They talked about other things. The neighborhood, which she had grown to like. A book she had been reading, which she described with the animated specificity of someone who has been spending a lot of time alone and misses having someone to report to. The bakery, which apparently had changed ownership since Ji Huan had last been there, but retained the recipes, which he noted as something to confirm later. They talked like people who have run out of small talk, and are therefore forced, by exhaustion, to talk about things that are actually true, and it was uncomfortable and also not entirely unpleasant. She did not tell him to leave after breakfast. She let him help with the dishes, which she did not need help with but allowed, standing at the sink while he dried, and he could see her watching him from the side of her eye with that same calculating expression, running the same assessment on a loop. Who is this person? Is he the person I knew? What does he want? What will this cost me? He did not ask to see the crib. He did not mention the medical paperwork. He did not bring up the divorce, or the apartment they had shared, or the morning she had left, or any of the 11,000 things that lived in the space between them. He dried dishes and listened to her talk about the book she was reading, and when she asked if he wanted more coffee, he said yes. It was not a breakthrough. It was one morning. But it was a morning that neither of them had expected to happen, and when he finally left at 10:30, she had a prenatal appointment and he had a meeting he could no longer postpone. She stood at the door and said, "The pastries were good." "I'll remember that," he said. "Don't read too much into it." "I won't." She looked at him for a moment with all the calculation in the world behind her eyes, and then she said, "Okay," in the tone of a woman issuing a provisional judgment, and closed the door. He walked down 4 flights of stairs and out through the push-pull door and stood on the sidewalk in the morning light with something he had almost forgotten how to carry, the specific fragile weight of a thing that might still be possible. He told himself not to trust it. He didn't trust it. He came back the next day anyway. The anonymous text arrived on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after the crosswalk. Nia had been showing him the ultrasound photos, not because she had planned to, but because he had asked about the appointment she'd mentioned, and she had answered because it was easier to answer than to explain why she wouldn't. And then somehow the photos were on the table between them, and he was leaning over them with an expression she had never seen on his face before, a complete and total absence of the control he typically maintained over his features, something raw and overwhelmed in its place. She had taken a photo of it, she realized, the ultrasound. She had pulled out her phone to look at the most recent image, and the phone had buzzed in her hand, and there was a notification she almost ignored and then did not ignore because the message preview was only 7 words, and those 7 words were enough. He was here this morning. Does he know? Unknown number. No name. No context. Except there was context, precisely because there was no name. Because anyone who knew her well enough to text her would have a name in the contact list, and this was not in the contact list, and the message was not an inquiry from a friend who had seen Ji Huan in the neighborhood. It was something else. It was the particular shape of something else. She set the phone face down on the table. Ji Huan was still looking at the ultrasound photo. He hadn't noticed. Ji Huan, she said. He looked up. He read her face. Whatever was on it, it was apparently enough. And the expression that had been there a moment before, the raw, unguarded thing, closed down and reconfigured into the other face, the face he wore when something required his full attention and he was deciding how to give it. What happened? He said. She turned the phone over. He read the message. She watched him read it. His jaw tightened by a fraction. She had learned to read the small calibrations of his body during their marriage, the way small movements in the architecture of his face indicated large movements in his interior. And then he looked up at her. When did this start? He said. That's the first one. Are you sure? She held his gaze. I would have told you. Something moved across his face that she chose not to examine too closely. Okay, he said. I need to... He stopped. He reached across the table and picked up his own phone. I need to make a call. Is that... Go ahead. He stood, moved to the window, spoke in Korean in a low voice. She could not hear the specifics. She sat at the table and looked at the ultrasound photo still lying there between the 2 coffee cups, their daughter's profile rendered in grayscale, and she pressed her fingers flat against the table and breathed. Someone was watching. Someone had been watching long enough to know about Ji Huan's visits, to know what time he arrived, to identify him as the relevant variable. Someone had her number. Someone had decided that she was worth the effort of monitoring. She had spent 7 months convincing herself that distance from Ji Huan was the protection she needed. She had constructed her entire calculus around that assumption, the belief that if she kept him out of her life, his world could not find her in it. She was beginning to understand that the calculus might have been wrong from the beginning. Ji Huan came back to the table. He sat down. He put both phones on the table, his and hers, and looked at her with the particular directness of a man who has decided that managing information is no longer the appropriate strategy. Tell me, she said before he could organize whatever he was planning to say. All of it, right now. He looked at her for a moment. There's a name, he said. Someone from before. I need to... He paused. I need to verify something before I tell you more because I don't want to give you a name and have it be wrong. How long to verify? By tonight? And if it's who you think it is? He put his hand flat on the table, not touching her, just on the table, present, a deliberate placement. Then I fix it, he said. She looked at his hand on the table. She looked at his face. She thought about the 7 months of silence and the push-pull door and the rocking chair she'd painted white and the stack of medical paperwork on the counter, all of it assembled in the careful, solitary architecture of a woman who had decided she could not afford to need him. She thought about the 7 words on her phone screen. He was here this morning. Does he know? Whoever had sent that message was not asking out of curiosity. Whoever had sent it was establishing something, a presence, a surveillance, a signal that said, I see you, I've always seen you, I've been watching this whole time. And the particular coldness of that signal was not the coldness of a stranger. It was the coldness of someone who knew exactly what it would cost. Okay, she said, tonight. She picked up the ultrasound photo and set it aside, carefully, face up, their daughter's profile in grayscale. A face that neither of them had seen yet, a life that had not yet begun outside this room, caught between a woman who had spent 7 months being certain and a man who had spent 14 months being wrong. Outside, on the street below, a car that had been idling for the past 40 minutes pulled away from the curb and turned left and disappeared. Neither of them saw it. Ping! By that evening, Ji Huan had a name. He sat in his car outside Nia's building at 8:47 at night, the engine running, the name sitting in his chest where the stone had been. And the name was Celine Vaughn, and the name changed the weight of everything. He had not expected Celine Vaughn. He had run through the roster in his head during the day. The competitors, the old debts, the people who had reason and capability. And he had not landed on Celine because Celine had not been operational in 2 years, had removed herself from the periphery of his world quietly and completely enough that he had stopped tracking her, which he now understood had been a significant miscalculation. He picked up his phone. He typed, "Can I come up?" Her response took 4 minutes. "It's almost 9. I know. I have the name. 30 seconds. Come up." He took the stairs. 4 flights, unhurried, and he knocked twice. Not the aggressive knock of a man who expects to be admitted, just 2 knocks, quiet, present. And she opened the door. She had changed into the kind of clothes that meant she'd been trying to sleep and failing. Her hair was different, looser, and she had one hand on the door frame and one hand at her side, and she was looking at him with the specific expression of a person who is braced. "Come in," she said. He came in. He sat on the couch. She sat in the chair across from it, the distance deliberate, and she looked at him. "Tell me," she said. "Celine Vaughn," he said. "She was—" "I know who she was." Nia's voice was very quiet. "I met her twice, during the marriage. Once at a function you brought me to, and once when she came to the office." She paused. "You told me she was an associate." She was. "An associate who apparently has my phone number and has been watching my apartment long enough to establish your schedule." He did not look away from her. "Yes. How long has she had my number?" "I don't know yet." "How long has she been watching me?" "I don't know that either. I'm going to find out." Nia was quiet. She pressed her thumb against the side of her index finger, a habit she had when she was thinking, and she looked at the wall to his left and she processed whatever she was processing in the particular interior silence of a woman who has been managing alone for a long time and has just been handed evidence that the thing she feared most was already present. "So it wasn't coincidence," she said. "You running into me today, 3 weeks ago." "Yes," he said. "That was coincidence." "But she knew about it." "Yes." "Within hours." "Yes." She looked at him. "Jihuan, what does she want?" He was quiet for a moment. This was the part he had been constructing on the way over. How to tell her without using it as a confession, without making it about himself when it needed to be about her safety. "She wants to prove something," he said. "About me. About what I am. She was—" He chose words carefully. "She was someone who believed she understood my world completely, and she was right, and when I cut ties with her professionally, she didn't take it neutrally. She's been gone long enough that I thought the matter was settled. And now she's texting me anonymous messages. It's a pattern," he said. "Psychological. She doesn't use direct threats. She uses presence. She makes you aware that she can see you, and she lets the awareness do the work." Nia looked at him for a long, still moment. "You're telling me," she said very slowly, "that a woman who knows everything about your operation, has my phone number and knows where I live and is sending me messages designed to make me afraid, and this is because you cut ties with her professionally." "Yes." "And you didn't know she was doing this?" "No." "But you also stopped tracking her." He held her gaze. "Yes." She stood up from the chair. She stood up and walked to the window and stood looking out at the street below, her hand on the glass and one hand at the front of her coat in that protective automatic gesture. And she stood there for a long time without saying anything. When she turned around, there were no tears. That was the thing about Nia. She did not weaponize tears, did not use them to communicate or to redirect or to soften the impact of what she was about to say. She stood there in her lived-in apartment with the partially assembled crib in the corner and the painted rocking chair and looked at him with clear, exhausted, entirely undeceived eyes. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," she said. "This is exactly the thing I spent 7 months trying to protect her from." He had nothing to say to that. There was nothing to say to it. "What are you going to do?" she said. "I'm going to handle it," he said. "Not the way you think. I'm going to—" "Don't tell me you'll make her disappear." "I'm not going to make her disappear. Because if you tell me that—" "I'm going to document it," he said. "Her messages, the surveillance, the pattern. I have an attorney. I'm going to give everything to the attorney and pursue it legally." He watched her face. "I know that's not what you expected me to say." It wasn't. He could see that it wasn't. I'm not doing this the other way, he said. Not for this. Not when it's about her. He nodded toward where her hand rested. I'm not putting that shadow on this. The apartment was very quiet. Outside, the city made its indifferent sounds. A car, a horn 2 blocks over, wind against the glass. Okay, she said finally. It came out rough-edged, scraped down to something very close to real. Okay. He stood. He put on his coat. He picked up his phone from the table. I'll be back tomorrow, he said. If that's... Tomorrow's fine, she said. He nodded. He moved toward the door. Ji-hwan. He stopped. She was standing in the middle of her apartment with her hand on her stomach and her chin up and the exhaustion in her face that he was beginning to understand was not something he had caused, but something he could, possibly, if she let him, help carry. Thank you for telling me the truth, she said. Even the part that made you look bad. He looked at her. I should have been doing that the whole time, he said. He left. He went down 4 flights of stairs and through the push-pull door and out onto the street, and he looked up at her window for a moment. The light was on, warm and small against the cold. And then he pulled out his phone and called his attorney, and the call connected on the second ring, and he started talking. 3 blocks away, in a parked car with the engine off, a phone screen lit up in the dark. On it, a single line of text sent to a number that was saved under no name at all. He's building a case. Interesting choice. Let's see how long that lasts. The screen went dark. The city kept moving. The attorney's name was David Wu, and he had been Ji-hwan's legal counsel for 9 years, which meant he had seen things that would have ended a lesser man's career and had filed the appropriate paperwork for all of them, without once asking a question he didn't need the answer to. He was 61 years old, wore the same style of gray suit in rotation, and had the specific emotional temperature of a man who had long since made his peace with the nature of his clients. He listened to Ji-hwan for 12 minutes without interrupting. Then he said, "You want to pursue this through civil harassment statutes?" "Yes." "Not through your usual channels?" "No." Wu looked at him across the desk with the measured expression of a man assembling a question he already knew the shape of. "Is this a strategic decision or a personal one?" "Both." "That's honest." Wu picked up his pen. "Tell me everything she's sent, dates, times, exact wording. I need the phone records, and I need documentation of any physical surveillance you can establish." "I'll have it by Friday." "I'll need her to be willing to make a statement." Ji-hwan was quiet for a moment. "I'll ask her," he said. Wu looked at him over the top of his glasses. In 9 years, he had never looked at Ji-hwan quite that way. With something that was not quite surprise but was adjacent to it, the expression of a man recalibrating an assumption he had held for a long time. "All right," Wu said. He wrote something down. "I'll start drafting." Nia did not sleep well that night. She lay in the dark with her hand on her stomach and her eyes on the ceiling, and she went through the arithmetic of the past 3 weeks, the way she had gone through it before. The crosswalk, the walk home, the food that appeared without being asked for, the breakfasts, the careful maintenance of distance, and she tried to find the place where the calculation had gone wrong. She couldn't find it. That was the problem. The calculation had assumed that distance from Ji-hwan was a protective measure. What the text message had revealed was that the protection she'd built her entire arrangement around had never existed. Celine Vaughn, and she remembered that woman, the precise way she had stood at that office function, watchful and measuring, with the specific stillness of someone who was always running an assessment. Celine Vaughn had apparently been watching from the beginning, before Ji-hwan had found her at the crosswalk, before any of this, which meant the danger was not something she had let back in by letting Ji-hwan back in. The danger had been there the whole time. She pressed her fingers against her stomach and felt her daughter move. A small shift, a repositioning, the particular interior weight of another person making themselves comfortable. And she stared at the ceiling and thought about what it meant to have been wrong about the most important decision she had made in the last 14 months. At 2 a.m, she got up and made tea. She stood at the kitchen window with the mug in both hands and looked at the street below, which was empty except for a cab moving through slowly and a man walking a dog on the far side. She looked at the parked cars. She did not know what she was looking for. She just looked. He came at 9 the next morning with coffee and without pastries. which told her something had happened because Ji-hwan used food as a social regulator, and the absence of it meant he was not in a social mode. She opened the door before he knocked. She had heard him on the stairs. "You look like you didn't sleep," he said. "You look like you did, but it didn't help," she said. He came in. She poured herself the tea she'd already made and left him to deal with the coffee situation, which he did without being asked, finding the cups without opening the wrong cabinets. And that small navigation, the way he moved through her small kitchen with the easy spatial memory of a man who had been paying attention, irritated her slightly in a way she did not examine. They sat. The table between them had the ultrasound photo still on it, which she had not moved, which was its own statement. "I talked to my attorney," he said. "And?" "He's drafting a civil harassment filing. He needs documentation of everything, dates, messages, evidence of surveillance, and he needs—" He looked at her directly. "He needs a statement from you." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "A statement. Attesting to what she sent, what you received, when, the effect it had." "The effect it had," she repeated. "Like in court." "Potentially, yes." She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the steam rising from her mug. "So I become the evidence. You become the person who establishes the pattern." "Ji-hwan." She looked up. "I left your world specifically to not become a piece of a legal proceeding." He held her gaze. He did not look away or reframe or offer her a version of the thing that was easier to swallow. "I know," he said, "and I'm sorry. I'm sorry that what I'm asking you to do is the thing you spent 14 months making sure you'd never have to do." It landed without deflection, and she felt it land, and that was worse in some ways than if he had argued with her. "Let me think about it," she said. "Okay." "Don't push." "I won't." She believed him. She believed him. And that was the part that made her jaw tighten, because believing him required recalibrating every protective instinct she had spent 14 months building into infrastructure. "What is she actually after?" Nia said. "Not the psychological explanation, the actual goal." Ji-hwan set his cup down. "She wants me destabilized. Specifically, she wants to demonstrate that I can be reached through personal attachment. It's not about you. Not primarily. You're the mechanism." That's a very clinical way to describe someone threatening a pregnant woman. "I know." "It also implies she knew about the pregnancy." He was quiet for a beat. "Yes." "How long has she known?" "I don't have that answer yet." "But longer than 3 weeks." "Probably." Nia set her mug down. She set it down carefully and folded her hands on the table and looked at them, at her own hands, and she did the breathing she had learned to do when panic tried to establish itself. Slow, measured, functional. "She's been watching me carry this baby," she said, "for months. Possibly most of the pregnancy. I don't know the timeline yet, but it's possible." He didn't answer, which was its own answer. She stood up. She picked up her mug and moved to the sink and stood with her back to him, and she breathed. And she felt her daughter shift again, that reliable interior movement, and she pressed one hand flat against the counter and focused on the solidity of it. "Get out of my apartment," she said. "Nia." "Not permanently." Her voice was flat, controlled, doing the work her hands couldn't do right now. "Just for today. I need you to not be here today." She heard him stand. She heard the chair scrape back. She heard him pick up his jacket from the hook by the door where he had started leaving it. "I'll call tonight," he said. "Fine. If you need anything before—" "Ji-hwan." She turned around. She looked at him from across the kitchen. The length of the small apartment, which was not very long but felt like enough right now. "I know you're trying. I see that you're trying. But I need you to understand that every time you bring me new information about how exposed I've been, I have to rebuild the whole picture from scratch, and that is exhausting. So today I need to do that alone." He looked at her. The expression on his face was the one she had been watching develop over the past 3 weeks. Not the controlled face, not the boss face, but something underneath it, something that did not yet have a finished shape. "Okay," he said. He left. She stood at the kitchen sink for a long time after the push-pull door sounded below. The second message arrived at 11:15 that morning. Nia was at the kitchen table with her laptop and her insurance paperwork and the particular focused grimness of a woman who has decided that administrative tasks are a reasonable substitute for the things she cannot control. And her phone lit up on the table beside her and she looked at it before she meant to. Unknown number, different from the first one, but the format identical. No greeting, no signature, just text dropped into the space like something thrown through a window. He was married before you. Did he ever tell you about Seoul? Ask him about the woman named Park Ji-yeon. Ask him what he did when she tried to leave. Nia stared at the screen. She put the phone face down. She put both hands flat on the table. She looked at the insurance paperwork and did not see it. Then she picked the phone back up and read the message again. Park Ji-yeon. She had never heard the name. In 4 years of marriage to Ji-hwan, in every conversation they had ever had about his past, and those conversations had been limited, carefully limited, because Ji-hwan had always held the past at an oblique angle. She had never heard that name. She had never asked the right questions, or he had never offered the right answers. She was no longer sure there was a meaningful difference. She typed the name into her phone browser and got nothing useful. There were thousands of Park Ji-yeons. And she sat with the phone in her hand and the question sitting in her chest next to the fear that had been building since yesterday. And she thought about what this message was designed to do. She knew what it was designed to do. Ji-hwan had told her presence, surveillance, psychological pressure. Celine Vaughn did not use direct threats. She used information. She used the particular leverage of things you didn't know, delivered at the exact moment when trust was most fragile. Knowing this did not make the message land with less force. She called him. He picked up on the first ring, which meant he had been waiting for her to call, which under other circumstances she might have found touching. "There's another one," she said. A pause. "Send it to me." She forwarded it. She heard him reading it on the other end. The quality of his silence changed, became denser. "Ji-hwan." She kept her voice level. "Who is Park Ji-yeon?" The silence that followed was 3 seconds long, which was 2 seconds longer than an innocent pause would require. "Where did she get that name?" he said. It came out low and tight, and it was not the answer to her question, and they both knew it. "Answer me." "Nia, no." She stood up from the table. She moved to the window, the same window she'd stood at 2 in the morning, and she looked at the street below. "Don't manage this. Don't construct the version of this that you think I can handle. Just answer the question." Another pause, shorter. "She was someone I knew in Seoul," he said, "before I came to the States, before any of this." "Was she your girlfriend?" "Yes." "And what happened when she tried to leave?" The silence this time was different. It was not the silence of a man calculating. It was the silence of a man who has arrived at a place he has been avoiding for a long time and has found that it looks exactly the way he expected. "It wasn't good," he said. "I was 26 years old and I was in the middle of something I didn't know how to be in, and when she tried to leave, He stopped. "I didn't hurt her. I want to be clear. I didn't hurt her physically, but I made it very difficult for her. I made it clear that leaving had a cost, and I collected that cost in ways that I am not proud of." Nia listened. She pressed her forehead lightly against the cold glass of the window. "She left eventually," he said. "She got out. I let her go eventually. But by the time I let her go, the damage was—" He exhaled. "It was done." "Does she know Celine?" "I don't know. Possibly. Celine knew everything about my operation. She would have had access to historical information. So Celine might have found her, might have spoken to her. It's possible." "And you never told me any of this?" "No." "During 4 years of marriage?" "No." She pushed off the glass and turned away from the window. The apartment was small around her, all its familiar textures suddenly feeling like the walls of something she had not consented to be inside of. "Why?" she said. Not angry. She was past angry, or not yet at it, in some anteroom before it. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was ashamed of it," he said, "and because telling you would have required me to examine what it said about who I was, and I was not ready to examine that." She stood in the middle of her apartment and held her phone and let that sit. "Are you ready now?" she said. "I don't have the luxury of not being ready now." It was not the right answer. It was also the true one, and she was tired enough and honest enough with herself to recognize the difference. "I need to think," she said. I know. Don't call me tonight. I'll call you. Okay. She ended the call. She stood in the middle of the apartment and her daughter moved inside her. That shift, that reliable weight. And she pressed both hands against her stomach and stood there with the insurance paperwork on the table and the partially assembled crib in the corner and the painted rocking chair that showed the original color through in places. And she thought about what it meant to love someone whose past kept arriving in her present, like a creditor collecting on a debt she hadn't known she'd co-signed. She thought about whether love was enough for that, whether any amount of love was structurally sound enough to bear that specific weight. She did not arrive at an answer. Jihuan sat in his car outside his office building for 22 minutes after the call ended. His driver did not ask. His driver had learned over 6 years that there were conditions under which questions were not the appropriate response. He sat and looked at the message she had forwarded. Celine had found Jian. That was the implication. The only way that name surfaced in this context was if Celine had done the archaeology, had gone back through 14 years and excavated what Jihuan had hoped was buried. He had not thought about Jian in a long time. That was both true and dishonest in the way of things that are technically accurate and functionally evasive. He had not thought about her deliberately, had placed her in the category of things he understood but did not revisit. He had been 26, and he had been ruthless in ways that had not yet finished becoming what they were becoming. And he had not known how to receive the decision of a woman who decided she did not want to be part of the life he was building. He had known better by the time he met Nia. He had believed he had processed the lessons. What he had done, he now understood, was cover them, not process them. Cover them with enough construction that they no longer interfered with his daily operations. Celine knew the difference. Celine was the most precise instrument he had ever encountered for identifying the gap between what a person believed about themselves and what was actually true. And she had spent 2 years inside his operation learning exactly where those gaps were. He called Park, his lieutenant. Celine Vaughn, he said when Park answered. I need everything from the last 6 months. Who she's spoken to, where she's been. If there's any travel to Seoul or contact with Korean nationals connected to anything from before 2018, I need it by tonight. Park was quiet for a moment. That's a significant pull. I know. It'll require, do it cleanly, Jihuan said. Whatever it costs. And Park, nothing else. No other action. Information only. Another pause. Understood. He ended the call. He sat another moment in the parked car. His phone lit up. Not a call, a text. Unknown number. The same format as Nia's messages, same blank anonymity, but sent to his phone this time, not hers. You're building a legal case. How responsible of you. How paternal. I wonder how long she'll let you play that role once she knows everything. Some things can't be filed with an attorney, Jihuan. Some things just live in a person and wait. He read it once. He put the phone in his jacket pocket. He got out of the car. He walked to the building entrance. He was thinking, and the thing he was thinking was not about Celine, not about Jion, not about the legal case or the messages or the exposed surveillance. He was thinking about Nia standing at her window at some point last night, looking at the street below, deciding whether the cars parked there were ordinary cars. He was thinking about her doing that alone, in the dark, with his daughter moving inside her, deciding whether she was safe. He went inside. He had 2 hours of meetings and a stack of decisions that required his signature and an empire that had been running on his attention for 11 years. And he walked through the lobby of his building with all of it waiting for him. And the only thing he could clearly see was a small apartment on Crestline with a rocking chair that had been painted white to cover something older, and a woman who had been right about every single thing she was afraid of. He sat through the meetings. He signed the papers. He did the work. At 8:45 that evening, his phone lit up with her name, her actual name in his contacts, not an unknown number. And he answered before the first ring finished. I'm not ready to trust you completely, she said. No greeting, straight to it. I want that to be clear. Clear, but I also... A pause. He could hear her breathing, slightly uneven, the sound of someone who had spent a day working through something hard and had arrived somewhere they had not fully anticipated. I also know that what she's doing is designed to make me not trust you, and I refuse to be managed. So, he said, so I need you to promise me something. Ask. Everything, she said. Whatever she sends me, whatever she digs up, whatever comes next, I hear it from you first. Not from an anonymous text, not from a message designed to destabilize me. You get ahead of it, every time. He was quiet for a moment. That means telling you things I have not wanted to tell anyone, he said. I know what it means. Some of it is Jihuan. Her voice was steady and direct, and carrying the weight of a woman who has already decided she can handle what she's asking for. I'm 7.5 months pregnant, and someone has been watching me for God knows how long, and I am done being the last person in the room to understand what's happening. So yes, all of it. Whatever she knows, you tell me first. He stood at his office window. The city below him moved in its relentless way. Light and traffic, and the distant sound of something that might have been construction or might have been something else. And he thought about what he was agreeing to, what it would cost, what it would uncover in him that had been covered for a long time. Okay, he said. Thank you. Naya, he stopped. What? The prenatal appointment next week, on the calendar. You circled it twice. A pause. What about it? Can I come? The silence that followed was long enough that he almost took it back. Then she said quietly, with the particular quality of something that costs more than the words suggest. Yes. The appointment was on a Thursday, and they sat in the waiting room of the clinic on Haverford Street with 4 other couples and one woman alone with a magazine. And it was the most ordinary thing Jihuan had done in years. A plastic chair, fluorescent light, a magazine rack with issues from 4 months ago, and he sat next to Nia with 6 inches between them and said nothing, because nothing was what she had not asked him for, and it was the thing he was learning he could give. The nurse called her name. Nia stood, looked at him. The question was in the look, and he stood with her. They went in together. The doctor was a woman in her 40s with a calm, efficient manner and the specific kind of directness that came from delivering important information to people who were not always ready to receive it. She acknowledged Jihuan without making the acknowledgement into a conversation, which he appreciated. The ultrasound machine was cold and clinical, and the room was small, and Nia lay on the table, and the gel was applied, and the room filled with the sound he was not prepared for. The heartbeat, fast and steady and entirely certain of itself. A sound that had no concern for the 14 months of separation, or the anonymous messages, or the legal filing in progress, or the name Park Ji-yeon, or any of the architecture of failure and damage, and careful covering that Jihuan had been building and dismantling. A sound that simply existed, rapid and reliable, inside the woman on the table, inside their daughter, inside the small room on Haverford Street. Jihuan stood next to the table, and something happened to his face that he did not attempt to control. Nia looked up at him. She looked up at him with the ultrasound image on the screen beside her and the heartbeat filling the room, and she watched whatever was happening to his face happen, and after a moment she reached out and found his hand and put it on her stomach. He felt it. The movement, the shift, the internal certainty of another life under his palm. For the first time, the doctor said something about measurements, about position, about the development being right on schedule. He heard the words at a distance. He was looking at the screen where his daughter's profile moved, briefly, and then settled. He understood then the thing that had been assembling itself over the past 3 weeks without his permission. The knowledge, arriving complete and irrevocable, that there was nothing in the empire, nothing in the operation, nothing in the entire architecture of the life he had built that had ever cost him this much, or mattered this much, or was this irreplaceable. He understood it completely. He understood it the way you understood a thing that could not be ununderstood. Nia's hand was still over his, her fingers warm, and she was watching the screen with the particular softness of a woman who has been carrying something alone for a long time and has just, in this moment, allowed someone else to carry it with her. He did not say anything. He pressed his hand against her stomach, and he stood in the small room and he listened to his daughter's heartbeat. Then Nia's phone buzzed. She ignored it. It buzzed again. A third time, rapid, insistent, and she reached for it with the hand that wasn't covering his, and he watched her face as she read whatever was on the screen, and he watched it change. She turned the phone to show him. It was not a text. It was an email from an anonymous address, and it contained one attachment and one line of text. The text said, "I was in the room for this one too." The attachment was a photograph. It was taken through a window. The angle was high, looking down. and it showed the waiting room of the clinic on Haverford Street, taken today, within the last 30 minutes. In the photograph, clearly visible, were two people sitting in plastic chairs with 6 inches between them. Jihuan and Nia in the waiting room before they were called in. Jihuan's hand tightened over Nia's stomach. He felt her breath go shallow under his palm. The heartbeat on the monitor continued its rapid, reliable beat, indifferent to everything happening in the room around it. And he looked at the photograph and he understood that the distance between them and Celine Vaughn was not the distance he had calculated. She was not surveilling from a careful remove. She was close. The doctor was still talking about measurements. Jihuan was not listening to the doctor. He was looking at the photograph on Nia's phone, the waiting room, the plastic chairs, the two of them rendered in the flat, slightly overexposed quality of a telephoto lens working through glass. And he was doing the calculation with the cold, automatic precision that 11 years of running an operation had built into him, whether he wanted it or not. High angle, looking down. Which meant the photograph was taken from across the street, second floor or above, from one of 3 buildings that had sightlines into the clinic's front windows, taken within the last 40 minutes, sent the moment they were called into the exam room, which meant Celine or someone working for her had a view of the interior and knew when the waiting room cleared. She had been there this morning before they arrived. She had planned this specific moment, the heartbeat, the exam room, the intimacy of it, and had timed the message to arrive inside it. Mr. Kang, he looked up. The doctor was watching him with the careful expression of a woman who has learned to read the temperature of a room. We're finished here, she said. Everything looks excellent. She's positioned well. She looked at Nia. You can get dressed. I'll have the nurse bring the printed images. Nia was already sitting up. She was doing it with the deliberate, functional movements of a woman who is managing herself through something and is not going to stop managing until she is in a position to stop, which was not here and not now. She took the phone back from Jihuan without looking at him and put it in her bag. The doctor left. The nurse followed. The door closed. The room was very quiet except for the monitor, which Jihuan reached over and turned off because the heartbeat in this particular moment felt like something that needed protecting from whatever was about to happen. She was outside, Nia said. Yes? Today. This morning. She knew about this appointment. Yes. Nia looked at him. She looked at him with the clearest, most undeflectable gaze she had aimed at him since the crosswalk, and behind it was not fear exactly, or not only fear, but something colder and more structural, the expression of a woman who has finished hoping the situation is other than it is. How? She said. How did she know about this appointment, Jihuan? I did not tell anyone. I have not posted anything. I circled it on my wall calendar in my apartment that no one else has been inside. He heard what she was not yet saying. He heard it clearly. No one else has been inside, she said again. He stood very still. You need to check your apartment, he said. She stared at him. The calendar on your wall, he said. The appointments in your notebook on the counter, all of it. He kept his voice level and deliberate, the way he kept his voice when the information was bad and the decision had to be made anyway. She may have had access to my apartment. Yes. You're telling me she may have been in my apartment. I'm telling you it's possible and we need to determine whether it's true. Nia got off the table. She picked up her coat from the chair and put it on, and she did not say anything for a long moment, and he let her not say anything because the silence was doing something, was processing something that words would interrupt. Okay, she said finally. The word came out flat and final, like a door being shut on something that was finished. Then let's go. They did not wait for the printed images. His security team met them at the building on Crestline within 20 minutes. 2 men Jihuan trusted with the specific trust of long professional history rather than personal affection, which was the only kind of trust he had ever found durable. They were thorough and they were quiet, and they moved through Nia's apartment with the practiced efficiency of people doing a job they had done before. Nia stood at the kitchen window with her arms crossed and watched them work. Jihuan stood near the door. He did not tell her it would be fine. He did not offer her water or suggest she sit down or produce any of the managing gestures he had been trained by a lifetime of difficult rooms to deploy. He stood near the door, and he waited. It took 11 minutes. The device was behind the smoke detector in the hallway. Small, wireless, battery-operated, the kind of thing that costs less than $100 and could be ordered without a name and installed in under 30 seconds by someone with a key or someone who had gotten through the push-pull door during a window when Nia was out. The second device was in the kitchen. Attached to the underside of the cabinet above the counter where she kept her notebook with the insurance information and the appointment dates. Two devices. Audio, not visual. Someone had been listening. The security team placed both units in a sealed bag and stood waiting for further instruction. Nia had not moved from the window. "How long?" she said. Her voice was very controlled, the kind of controlled that was one layer above something that was not controlled at all. "I don't know yet," Ji-hwan said. "We'll have the devices analyzed. They'll give us a date range." "Estimate." "Nia, estimate." She turned from the window. "You've seen equipment like this before. How long could it have been here?" He looked at the bag in his man's hand. The battery type, the model, the wear on the casing. 2 months, he said. Possibly 3. She looked at him. She looked at him with the expression of a woman doing arithmetic she did not want the answer to and getting it anyway. And the answer was that for 2 to 3 months, while she was alone in this apartment, talking to herself, crying when she cried, saying things out loud that a person said when they believed they were alone, someone had been listening. "Get them out of here," she said, "both of them," and she stopped. She pressed her fingers against her forehead. "And I need to know if there are more. Anywhere. I need to know if my phone is—" "We'll check everything," Ji-hwan said. He nodded to his team. They moved. He turned back to Nia. "I'm going to need you to pack a bag," he said. "I'm not leaving my apartment. Naya, this is my home." The words came out with a force that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but occupied the space between them. "I painted that chair. I assembled that crib. She stopped. She looked at the partially assembled crib in the corner, and something moved through her face and then was gone. "I am not being pushed out of my home." He understood. He understood the significance of the chair and the crib and the push-pull door and the broken buzzer panel and all of it. The entire carefully constructed evidence of a life that she had built with her own hands to prove she did not need what she had given up. "Not permanently," he said. 3 days. While we do a full security assessment of the building, identify how she got in, and establish whether there are additional devices." "And where would I go?" "Somewhere safe." She looked at him. The weight of the question she was not asking was present in the room like a third person. "I have a place," he said. "Secure. She doesn't know it. It's not in any records connected to me or to this situation. You would have your own space. I would not impose." "You would be there." "Yes." She looked at the crib. She looked at the rocking chair. She looked at the calendar on the wall with the circled dates that someone had been reading for months. "One condition," she said. "Name it." "We come back here. When this is resolved. This apartment. I come back here." "Yes." "I mean it. I don't get relocated into your world. We fix this, and I come home." "You come home," he said. She held his gaze for a moment, checking the weight of the words against the expression on his face, running the assessment she had been running since the crosswalk. "Fine," she said. "Give me 20 minutes." She packed with the efficiency of someone who has learned not to be attached to the logistics of movement, a single bag, practical, no sentiment in the selection. Ji-hwan did not help. He stood in the hallway and made calls, and she packed, and they were out of the building in 24 minutes. In the car, she did not speak for the first 10 blocks. The city moved past the windows in its indifferent way, and she sat with her bag on her lap and her hand on her stomach and looked straight ahead. "Tell me about Celine," she said. "Not the explanation you've been managing, the real one." He looked at the back of his driver's head for a moment. "She came into my operation 8 years ago," he said. "Through a professional introduction. She was precise. She had a specific talent for identifying vulnerability in systems, in people. I used that talent for 2 years. Professionally?" A pause. Brief, but present. "And personally," he said. For a period, Nia did not react visibly. He had learned to watch for the small reactions, the slight adjustment of her breathing, the fraction of tension in her jaw. And they were there, but contained. During our marriage, she said. No. He said it without hesitation, because it was true, and truth was the agreement he had made. Before we met. It ended 2 years before you and I. But she knew about me. During our marriage. Yes, she knew about you. And she removed herself, he said, at the time. She left the operation, removed herself from my proximity. I interpreted that as the matter being resolved. But she was watching, apparently, for years. Apparently. Nia was quiet. She turned her head and looked out the window at the city moving past, and he let her look. She heard everything, Nia said. In that apartment, for 2 months. She heard me talking to my mother on the phone. She heard me talking to the baby. Her voice was steady and factual, and underneath the steadiness was something that was not going to stay underneath much longer. She heard me cry at 3 in the morning because I was scared and alone, and I didn't want to admit how scared I was. He had nothing to offer against that. There was nothing that functioned as an adequate response to it. So he said the only thing that was true. I know. That's personal, she said. What she did with those devices, that's not strategic. That's not about you. That's personal, against me. Yes. She hates me. She doesn't know you, he said. She hates what you represent. Which is what? He looked at her profile against the window. The fact that I was capable of it. She turned and looked at him. Capable of what? She said. Of the thing she decided I wasn't capable of, he said. He stopped. Of actually loving someone was what he did not say, because it was true, and it was the kind of true that required the right moment to survive being said. Of choosing differently. Nia looked at him for a long moment. The car turned, the light changed, and she turned back to the window. Okay, she said quietly. Not agreement, just acknowledgement. The word she used when she had absorbed something and needed time to decide what to do with it. The safe house was an apartment in a building that did not appear on any record connected to Ji Huan's name, held through 3 layers of corporate structure. Used perhaps twice in the past 5 years, clean and spare, and entirely without the markers of his usual life. Nia walked through it once, assessed it with the same systematic attention she brought to every new space, and said nothing except, the bed in the second room, which he interpreted correctly as her staking her claim to the room that was not the primary one. She was in that room with the door mostly closed when his phone rang at 10:40 that night. It was Park. Talk, Ji Huan said. He was at the kitchen table with a glass of water and the sealed evidence bag on the counter, and the specific quality of wakefulness that came from being too alert for sleep. Park talked for 4 minutes. Ji Huan listened. He did not move. He listened the way he listened when the information was the kind that rearranged the architecture of everything around it. When Park finished, Ji Huan said, "Say the name again." Park said it again. Ji Huan sat at the kitchen table for a moment after the call ended. The name Park had given him was not Celine Vaughn. It was Lee Min Jun, who had been with Ji Huan for 7 years, and who was currently 3rd in the operational hierarchy, and who had access to scheduling information, building security systems, communication intercepts, and the physical address of the apartment on Crestline, an address that Ji Huan had located for himself and had never shared with anyone except the one person he had trusted to run the security assessment. He had trusted Park. Park had told him Min Jun. He sat with that for a moment. The clean, surgical feeling of a betrayal that was so precisely placed that you had to acknowledge the craftsmanship of it even as it took you apart. Min Jun had not acted alone. Min Jun was the inside, Celine was the outside. Celine had not found Nia through patient external surveillance and random intelligence gathering. She had a direct line. She had been fed information about Nia's address, her phone number, her building entry sequence, her appointment schedule, her daily patterns, directly from inside Ji Huan's operation, for 2 months, possibly longer. And Min Jun had run the security sweep today. Min Jun had identified the devices. Ji Huan was very still at the kitchen table. He was thinking about what Min Jun had had time to do between the clinic this morning and the security sweep this afternoon. What he had observed, what he had relayed. He picked up his phone. He called Park back. Min Jun knows we found the devices, he said. A pause. Yes. Where is he now? That's why I'm calling back, Park said. and the quality of his voice had changed in a way that Ji-hwan recognized. The flatness of a person delivering information that is going to cost someone in the room. He's gone. His phone is off. His apartment is clear. He was gone before the sweep finished. Ji-hwan said nothing. "There's more," Park said. "Tell me." "The financial accounts, the secondary holdings, the ones with the offshore structure that the legal filing is drawing from." A pause. Minjun had access to the documentation, the filing itself, the dates, the evidence chain Wu has been building. All of it went through systems Minjun could read. Ji-hwan set his glass of water down very carefully on the table. "Celine has the legal filing," he said. "She has everything in it," Park said. "Every piece of evidence, every name, every financial connection. She knows exactly what you're building against her, and she has had at least 6 hours to respond to it." The room was very quiet. Somewhere in the building, a pipe moved with the small sound of old construction settling, and Ji-hwan sat at the kitchen table in the safe house that was no longer a safe house, because Minjun had run the security sweep, had been inside it, had almost certainly relayed the address, and looked at the glass of water on the table. The glass of water was very still. "Get Wu on the phone," he said. "Tonight. Now. Tell him to assume the filing is compromised and nothing in it is protected. And Park..." He stopped. "I know," Park said quietly. "I'm already looking." Ji-hwan ended the call. He sat at the table for 30 seconds. 30 seconds of complete and absolute stillness, the kind that happened when a man was moving very fast on the inside and had learned that the outside needed to be the opposite. Then he stood and walked to the door of the second bedroom and knocked twice. A pause. "What?" "I need to tell you something." Another pause. The door opened. She was standing in the doorway in the clothes she'd packed, her hair loose, and she looked at his face and her expression changed immediately. Not to fear, but to the thing that preceded it. The recognition that the information coming was not the manageable kind. "The safe house is compromised," he said. "Someone from my operation gave Celine access to everything. Your apartment, your phone number, the legal filing. And he ran today's security sweep, which means he knows this address." She looked at him without speaking. "We need to move," he said. "Tonight, in the next 20 minutes. She looked at him for a moment. He watched her absorb it, the specific sequence of it, the understanding of what it meant that the man he had trusted to assess her apartment for security vulnerabilities had been the vulnerability. He watched her reach the part where she understood that the legal strategy, the filing, the careful documented evidence chain, was now in Celine's hands. He watched her reach the part where there was nothing left that was not exposed. "Okay," she said. Her voice was very level. "Let me get my bag." She turned back into the room. He stood in the doorway and watched her move, deliberate, precise, no wasted motion. And he felt it then, fully and without insulation, the thing he had been building walls against since the crosswalk. He had done everything right. He had chosen the attorney. He had chosen restraint. He had built the case legally, carefully, with the intention of proving to her and to himself that he was capable of being different from what he had always been. He had put her in a safe house and run a security sweep and constructed every available protection. And it had all fed directly to the person trying to destroy them. She came back to the doorway with her bag over her shoulder. She stood there and looked at him with the clear, exhausted gaze of a woman who has run out of the luxury of deciding whether to trust him and is now simply in the situation, fully and without exit. "Where do we go?" she said. He opened his mouth to answer, and then her hand went to her stomach. Both hands, fast, instinctive, the way a person reached for something that was falling. And the sound she made was not a word. It was something below language, and the color left her face in the space of a single second. "Ji-hwan," she said. He was already moving. He got her to the car in 4 minutes. She did not argue. She did not ask questions. She moved with him through the building's service exit. He had learned the layout during the 20 minutes she had been unpacking, because learning the layout of every space he occupied was not a habit he could turn off. And into the alley behind it, where his car was already running, because he had texted the driver the moment she made that sound. The sound she had made. Below language. The sound of a body reporting something that the mind had not yet processed. She was in the back seat with both hands pressed flat against her stomach, and her jaw set with the specific tightness of someone managing pain through will alone. He was next to her. The driver already knew Mercy General. Ji-hwan had said it while they were still in the stairwell. 2 words, and the driver had not needed anything else. "Talk to me," Ji-hwan said. "I'm fine. You're not fine." "I'm—" She exhaled through her teeth. "It's pressure, sharp pressure, low." "How long?" "Just now. It just started." He pulled out his phone, called the OB emergency line from the card she had given him 2 weeks ago when he'd asked. Casually, she had thought, but she had given it to him, and he had put it in his contacts without comment. The line connected, and he described what she had described, and the nurse said, "Come in now," and he said they were already coming. Nia had her eyes closed. Her head was back against the seat, and her hands were still flat on her stomach, and she was breathing, slowly, deliberately, the breathing she had learned in the prenatal class she had attended alone. The breathing she had practiced in her apartment over a microphone that had been transmitting everything to a woman who wanted to use it as leverage. "She's going to be okay," Nia said. He did not know whether she was saying it to him, or to herself, or to their daughter. He thought it was probably all 3. "Yes," he said. He said it with conviction because conviction was what the moment required, and also because the alternative was not something he was willing to consider while sitting in a moving car with his hands useless in his lap. He reached over and put his hand over hers, both of them, covering them. She did not pull away. She turned one hand over under his and held on, and that was the position they were in when the car reached the hospital entrance 4 minutes later. Chot. The triage nurse moved fast. Ji-hwan had learned over the years that hospitals moved at their own pace, regardless of the urgency the person presenting believed they were communicating. But something in the combination of Nia's visible distress and his particular manner of standing at the desk produced movement, and they were through the doors and in an exam room within 7 minutes. He stood against the wall while they worked. He had positioned himself carefully, close enough to see everything, far enough to be out of the way, the specific geometry of someone who has learned that presence and interference were different things. Nia was on the monitor, fetal heartbeat on the screen, that rapid, reliable sound filling the room, and he listened to it, and it was the only thing in the room that mattered. The attending physician came. She was young, younger than Ji-hwan had expected, which was a reaction he recognized as irrational. And she moved with the compressed efficiency of someone who had been through many of these and understood that the outcome was what mattered, not the presentation. "Pain level, 1 to 10, she said to Nia. 6, maybe 7. "Constant or intermittent?" "Intermittent. Started about 15 minutes ago." "Any bleeding?" "No." "Have you been under significant stress today?" Nia made a sound that was almost a laugh. It came out wrong, compressed by pain and exhaustion into something that was more like a cough. "Yes," she said. The doctor looked at the monitor. She looked at the numbers. She adjusted something and looked again. "The baby's heart rate is strong," she said. "I'm not seeing immediate distress. What I am seeing is that you're experiencing significant uterine contractions. Not labor, but stress response contractions. Your body is reacting." She looked at Nia directly. "I need you to tell me honestly how long you've been under sustained psychological stress." Nia was quiet for a moment. "Months," she said. The doctor nodded once, the nod of someone who has just confirmed a suspicion. "We're going to keep you for observation tonight. I want to get your blood pressure down, monitor the contractions, and make sure they don't progress. If everything stabilizes in the next 2 to 3 hours, you are not in labor and you are not at immediate risk." She paused. "But I need you to understand something. You are 32 weeks pregnant. The psychological pressure you have been experiencing has a direct physiological effect. This will happen again if the stress continues." She looked at Ji-hwan when she said the last sentence. Not accusatorially, just factually, the way a physician looked at the relevant variable in the room. "It won't continue," he said. The doctor looked at him for a moment longer, assessing, in the way of someone deciding whether a statement was a promise or a performance. And then she returned to her chart. "I'll have a nurse get you something for the pain," she said to Nia. "Rest. That's the only instruction right now. She left. The room was quieter without her. The monitor continued its rapid, reliable report. Nia lay with her eyes on the ceiling, and Ji Huan stood against the wall, and the only sound between them was the heartbeat and the distant sounds of the hospital operating around them. She told you to fix it, Nia said. Her voice was quieter than it had been in the car, the pain medication starting to reach the edges of things. Yes. Are you going to? Yes. How? He had been asking himself that question since the moment in the kitchen of the safe house, sitting at the table with the glass of water and the evidence bag and the knowledge that his legal strategy was in Celine's hands. He had been running it on a loop through the car ride and the triage and the standing against the wall, and he had arrived at an answer that was not the answer he had promised himself he would use. I need to go, he said. She turned her head and looked at him. Not for long, he said. 2 hours. 3 at most. I need to… Ji Huan. Her voice was flat and direct and entirely unmedicated in its clarity. Tell me what you're going to do. He looked at her. On the monitor, their daughter's heartbeat filled the room. I'm going to find Min Jun, he said, and I'm going to find out exactly what he gave her and when and what she intends to do with it. And then I'm going to find Celine, and I'm going to end this. End it how? Not the way you're thinking. You said that before. I know. And then Min Jun was in my apartment, and the filing was compromised, and we're in a hospital room. She looked back at the ceiling. At some point, the meaning of words has to match the outcome. He stood against the wall. He took that without deflecting it, because it was accurate, and she had earned the right to say it. I'm not going to hurt anyone, he said. I'm going to get in front of her, face to face. No intermediaries, no documentation, no filing. Me and her in a room, and whatever leverage exists between us used directly. He paused. She wants a reaction from me. She has been engineering a reaction from me for months. I'm going to give her one. Just not the one she's planned for. Nia looked at the ceiling for a long moment. There's a nurse outside, she said. She'll come if I press the call button. Yes? And you'll have your phone. On the whole time. She closed her eyes. The monitor reported steadily. Go, she said. Go and come back. He moved to the side of the bed. He stood there for a moment. He did not know what the gesture was, only that there needed to be one, something that was not words. And he put his hand briefly against the side of her face, and she turned into it slightly, just slightly, the way a person turned toward warmth without meaning to. Then he straightened and walked out. Park met him in the hospital parking structure on the second level. Park was 53 years old and built like a man who had grown up expecting physical confrontation and had developed his body accordingly, and then discovered that the confrontation most worth winning was informational. He had a phone in each hand and the expression of someone who had not slept and was not planning to. Min Jun's phone pinged a tower in the Garfield district 40 minutes ago, Park said. He's still in the city. He's waiting, Ji Huan said. For what? For instruction. From her. Ji Huan took the phone Park extended, a secondary line untraceable. She hasn't told him what to do next, which means she hasn't decided yet, which means she's still building towards something. The filing, Park said. If she releases what's in it, she won't release it, Ji Huan said. Release it and it's finished. She holds it, she has leverage. Selene does not destroy weapons. She uses them. So she wants a meeting. She wants me to come to her, Ji Huan said. That's what all of this has been. The messages, the devices, the photograph in the clinic, the timing with the hospital tonight. It's all designed to back me into a position where I have no option except to come to her directly. He put the phone in his pocket. So I'm going to come to her directly, just sooner than she planned. Park looked at him. She'll have prepared for that. I know. It could be a setup. I know. You want backup? No. He said it without hesitation. She'll have surveillance. She sees backup. She disappears, and this goes on another month, and Nia spends another month in that hospital room. He looked at Park steadily. Get me an address, somewhere she'd go that's connected to the operation, somewhere she'd feel she had the advantage. She'll be somewhere she knows, and I don't. Park was already on the phone. The address was a building in the old warehouse district on the east side, a property that had moved through 3 corporate structures in the past 4 years and had ended up, at the far end of the chain, adjacent to an LLC that had once been adjacent to Ji Huan's operation before he had restructured and removed it. Celine would have known about it, would have held it as a contingency, would have understood when she saw Ji Huan's operation restructure around her removal that she needed places he didn't know she still had access to. Ji Huan knew about it because Min Jun's phone had pinged a tower 3 blocks from it, and because Park, once given direction, was thorough. He went alone. He drove himself, something he almost never did, which was itself a statement about what this was, in a car that was not his registered vehicle, through streets that were quiet with the particular quiet of a city at 11 at night, when the day's activity had concluded and the nights had not yet fully begun. He parked a block and a half away. He walked the rest. The building had an exterior entrance at street level that was locked, and a loading bay at the side that was not. He had noted this on the approach. The loading bay door was not fully closed, held up by a brick that someone had placed deliberately. An invitation. He accepted it. Inside the building was large and mostly empty. High ceilings, concrete floor, the smell of disuse and old machine oil and something chemical underneath. A series of industrial lights had been rigged at the far end, casting a pool of yellow-white light in the darkness. In that pool, 2 chairs, one occupied. Celine Vaughn was sitting in the occupied chair with her legs crossed and her hands in her lap, and an expression of such complete composure that it almost looked like boredom. She was in her mid-40s, dark-haired, dressed with the kind of deliberate simplicity that announced itself as a choice. She looked like a woman at a business meeting she had already decided the outcome of. The second chair was empty, positioned facing hers, exactly the distance apart that a person would need to sit to have a conversation. Ji Huan walked to the edge of the light and stopped. "You're earlier than I expected," she said. "She's in the hospital," he said. "I didn't want to wait." Something crossed Celine's face. It was not regret. It did not have the shape of regret, but it was not nothing either. It was the face of someone who has set a thing in motion and has received confirmation that it went further than anticipated and is filing that information without revising the plan. "She'll be fine," Celine said. "The baby will be fine." "You don't know that." "I do, actually. Stress contractions at 32 weeks with no other complications resolve with rest in the large majority of cases." She paused. "I've been thorough." "I know how thorough you've been," he said. 2 devices, 3 months. You heard everything." "I did." "And?" She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, not softening, but changing quality, the way light changed when a cloud moved. "And she loves you," she said. "Hopelessly, inconveniently, against every reasonable decision she's made. I listened to 3 months of a woman trying to talk herself out of something that was already done." She paused. "I didn't expect that to be as difficult to listen to as it was." Ji Huan looked at her. He had known Celine for 8 years. He had known her with the particular knowledge of someone who has worked alongside a person in high-pressure circumstances and has learned to read the specific grammar of their behavior. He had known she was capable of this, the surveillance, the engineering, the psychological precision, and he had underestimated it anyway. "What do you want?" he said. "Sit down." "I'll stand." She looked at him for a moment, then accepted it. "I want you to understand something," she said. "Not to apologize, not to make a gesture, to understand." "Tell me." "When you cut me out," she said, "you didn't just end a professional arrangement. You removed me from the only structure I had ever found that matched how I operated. I had built 7 years inside your operation. I had made it what it was. And you restructured around me and handed me a severance number and expected me to absorb that as a business decision. It was a business decision. For you." Her voice remained level, but something underneath it had changed. "For me, it was everything. And you knew that. You knew exactly what it was for me, and you handed me the severance number anyway. And so you spent 2 years watching a pregnant woman alone in a small apartment," he said. "That's the proportionate response. I spent 2 years watching you make choices you were never capable of making when I was in your life," she said, "and deciding whether those choices were real or whether they were just what you became when the right person was in your orbit." She uncrossed her legs and leaned forward, forearms on her knees. "Do you want to know what I concluded?" "Tell me." That they're real, she said. That you have actually become something different, and that it's entirely because of her. She held his gaze. Which makes her the single most dangerous person in your world, Jihuan, because you are not invulnerable anymore. You have a specific identified point of failure, and everyone who has ever had a grievance with you now has a map to it. The warehouse was very quiet. The light above them hummed. So your plan is what? He said. Warn me by terrorizing her. My plan was to see what you'd do, she said simply. Whether you'd revert, whether you'd send people, whether the old version of you was still in there waiting for sufficient pressure to bring it back out. She paused. You built a legal case instead. I'll admit I didn't anticipate that. And Minjun, she was quiet for a moment. Minjun came to me, she said. I didn't recruit him. He had his own grievances and he found me. I used what he offered. Where is he? Gone, she said. He knows you know. He made his own calculation. Jihuan looked at her. He was very still in the way of someone who is running an enormous amount of process on the inside and has learned to keep the outside as a separate and unrelated system. The filing, he said, what Wu built. I have it. What do you intend to do with it? She looked at him steadily. That depends on this conversation. Then let's have the conversation. She stood. She stood and looked at him from across the pool of light, and the expression on her face was the most unguarded thing he had seen on it in 8 years of knowing her. Not soft, not regretful, but present in a way she rarely permitted herself to be present. I want out, she said. Not from you, Yi. I've been out from you. From everything. Every record, every connection, every piece of paper that puts my name adjacent to anything you've ever been involved in. I want it clean. Wu does the documentation. I give you everything Minjun provided me, and I disappear and this ends. And Naya? She never hears from me again. That's not a sufficient answer. Celine looked at him. She never hears from me again, she said. Her daughter grows up not knowing my name. That's what I'm offering. Everything in exchange for clean paper and permanent distance. Jihuan looked at her for a long moment. He thought about Nia in the hospital room with the monitor, and the heartbeat, and the exhaustion in her face that had been building for months. He thought about the rocking chair painted white to cover something older. He thought about the push-pull door and the broken buzzer panel, and the specific, deliberate architecture of a life built to prove that she did not need the thing she had decided was too dangerous to need. He thought about what it would cost to say yes. He thought about what it would cost to say no. I need one more thing, he said. Celine waited. Minjun, he said. Whatever he took from my operation, financials, records, names, I need to know everything he accessed and everything he gave you, not a summary, everything. She looked at him. She was calculating. He could see her calculating, the same way he calculated, the same architecture of assessment that had made them effective together and made this moment possible and made the past 2 years inevitable. Tonight, she said, I'll have it transferred to Wu directly. Now, he said, before I leave this building. She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she reached into the bag beside the chair and produced a drive and held it out. He walked into the light and took it from her hand. They were close enough that he could see the specific quality of her expression, the thing that was not regret and not nothing, that occupied the space between them like a third presence, the accumulated weight of 8 years and 2 years and everything that had happened in all of it. She's going to be okay, Celine said. She said it quietly, differently than she had said it before, not as a clinical assessment, but as something she was giving him. He looked at her for a moment. Then he turned and walked back through the dark warehouse, past the loading bay door held open by its brick, out into the night air. And he was already dialing as he walked, the phone to his ear, and Park answered on the second ring. Get Wu, Jihuan said. Now, tonight. He got to the car. He sat behind the wheel with the drive in his hand and his phone still warm from the call and the city outside doing its indifferent 11 o'clock business, and he sat there for exactly 30 seconds. Then he started the car and drove back toward Mercy General. He was 3 blocks from the hospital when his phone lit up with her name. He answered immediately. Jihuan. Her voice was different. Not the managed voice, not the controlled one, but something underneath all of it, stripped of the structure she had built around it. She kicked, she said. Just now, for the first time tonight. The nurse said it's a good sign, that it means—" She stopped. He could hear her breath. "I just wanted you to know." He held the phone against his ear in the parked car outside Mercy General and looked at the entrance through the windshield and said nothing for a moment, because there was nothing to say that was equal to what he was feeling, which was enormous and specific and entirely without the insulation he had spent 11 years installing. "I'm outside," he said. "I'm coming up." "Okay," she said. He got out of the car. Inside the hospital, on the 4th floor, in a room with a monitor that reported steadily and a window that showed the city doing its relentless work, a woman lay in a bed with both hands on her stomach and waited for the sound of footsteps in the hall that she recognized. And when she heard them, something in her shoulders that had been held tight for months released by a fraction, just a fraction, not everything, not yet, but enough. The footsteps stopped outside the door. A knock. 2. Quiet and present. She said, "Come in." He opened the door and stood in the frame for a moment. Just a moment, the length of a breath. And she looked at him from the bed with the monitor beside her, and the city in the window behind her, and the specific expression of a woman who has been waiting for something she had not fully admitted she was waiting for. He looked like what he was. A man who had been through something in the last 3 hours and had not entirely reassembled on the outside. His jacket was open, and there was a tightness around his eyes that was not the controlled tightness she had learned to read as management, but something rawer underneath it, the tightness of a person who has made a decision that cost him and is still carrying the cost. He came in. He closed the door. He pulled the chair from the corner to the side of the bed, not the far side, not a polite distance, the near side, close, and he sat down and put both forearms on his knees and looked at her. "Tell me," she said. He told her. All of it. The warehouse, the drive, the conversation with Celine, the 8 years and the 2 years, and the specific, precise calculation that had produced all of this. He told her about Minjun and what Minjun had accessed and what Celine had done with it. He told her about what Celine had asked for and what he had agreed to give her. He told her about Gion, the fuller version, the one he had compressed on the phone 2 days ago. He told her with the deliberate, uncomfortable specificity of a man keeping the promise he had made, everything before she heard it from anywhere else. And he watched her face while he told her, and he did not look away from what he saw there. She listened. She did not interrupt. She lay in the hospital bed with the monitor reporting beside her and her hands flat on her stomach, and she listened to the whole of it, and when he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Gion," she said. "Did she leave eventually?" "Yes." "On her own terms?" He thought about how to answer that honestly. "She got out," he said. "It took longer than it should have, and I made it harder than it needed to be. She got out." "Do you know where she is now?" "No." "Have you tried to find out?" "No." Nia looked at him. She looked at him with the clear, undeflected attention that had been her primary mode since the day he'd found her at the crosswalk. The attention of a woman who had been lied to by omission for 4 years and had spent 14 months in the aftermath deciding what she was worth. "I'm not going to pretend that doesn't matter," she said. "The Gion thing. What you did to her. I know. It matters. It tells me something about who you were." "Yes." "And it tells me something about what you were capable of when someone tried to leave you." He held her gaze. "I know what it tells you. I left you," she said. "And you—" She stopped. She looked at the window for a moment, at the city and the dark outside it. "You didn't do any of that. You signed the papers and you disappeared, and you didn't make it harder." She looked back at him. "I didn't understand that at the time. I thought it was just that you didn't care enough to fight. But it wasn't that." "No," he said. "It wasn't that. You knew what you'd done to her, and you decided you weren't going to be that again." He looked at her. The monitor beside her tracked their daughter's heartbeat with its reliable, indifferent accuracy. "Something like that," he said. She was quiet again. The quiet between them was different from the quiet of the first 3 weeks. Less guarded, less structured, not yet comfortable but no longer defended. The quiet of two people who have run out of things to hide and are sitting in what remains. "The deal you made," she said. "With Celine. Clean paper, and she disappears. Yes? Wu can do that." Wu is already working on it. And the drive. Minjun's access logs. With Wu tonight, he'll have a full accounting of everything Minjun accessed by morning. She pressed her lips together. Not anger. Something more complicated, the expression of a person tallying a ledger that has more entries than anticipated. How bad is it? She said. The exposure. From what Minjun took. Significant, he said. He said it without softening it. The financial structure he had access to. Some of it connects to things that are not clean. I'm going to have to dismantle it, not selectively. The whole architecture. Anything that Minjun could have copied. Anything that creates a liability. He paused. It will cost. Substantially. How substantially? Enough that the operation looks different on the other side of it. She looked at him. He saw her understand what he was saying, not just the financial cost, but the structural one. The acknowledgement that what he was describing was not a repair but a reduction, a fundamental change in the shape of the thing he had spent 11 years building. Is that why you're telling me? She said. Because you want me to know what it costs. I'm telling you because you asked, he said, and because you should know, because we're... He stopped. He looked at the monitor, at the numbers and the heartbeat. Because whatever we are now, you are not the last person in the room to understand what's happening. That was the agreement. She looked at him for a long moment. Whatever we are now, she said. She repeated it back without inflection, but not without weight. He looked at her. He looked at her with the thing that had been building since the crosswalk, that had been building probably since well before the crosswalk, since the divorce papers, and the morning she had walked out of the attorney's office, and he had stood on the sidewalk and told himself that distance was protection. I don't know what to call it, he said. I don't want to name it wrong. I've named things wrong before. She almost smiled. It didn't quite arrive, but it moved across the edge of her face, the shape of it, the possibility of it. Okay, she said. Don't name it. Okay. Just... She shifted, adjusting the pillow behind her, and he moved forward automatically to help, and she let him, which was its own sentence. Just be here, she said. Right now. Just this. Yes, he said. He settled back into the chair. She lay against the pillow. The monitor reported. Outside the window, the city maintained its relentless indifferent pace, and inside the room on the 4th floor of Mercy General, there were 2 people and a heartbeat, and the long, specific quiet of a thing that had survived being broken. Upa. Wu called at 7:40 the next morning. Jihuan was in the chair beside the bed, which he had not left. He had slept briefly, an hour, possibly less, in the particular upright way of someone who had learned to rest in uncomfortable positions without fully releasing their awareness. Nia was asleep. He answered on the first ring and stepped into the hallway. The drive is clean, Wu said. Everything Minjun accessed is documented. I have a full list. How bad? Manageable, Wu said, in the careful way he used the word when he meant that it would require significant work. Some of it we can address through restructuring. Some of it is going to require you to make decisions about assets you have not previously been willing to discuss. I'm willing now. A pause. Wu processed this. All right, he said. I'll have a full recommendation by end of week. Regarding the other matter, he meant Celine. The documentation she's requesting. Clean exit, severed connections. I can do it. It will take 2 weeks to do it properly. Do it properly. And she delivers her end. She'll deliver, Jihuan said. He said it with the certainty of someone who had sat across from Celine Vaughn in a warehouse at 11 at night and had read the specific quality of a person who had already made their decision and was keeping it. She's done. I'll need you in the office Thursday, Wu said. Full day. There's a significant amount to go through. Thursday, Jihuan said. Yes. He ended the call. He stood in the hospital hallway for a moment. The hallway was moving around him, nurses and carts, and the ambient sounds of a building built around the management of crisis. And he stood in the middle of it and thought about Thursday, about Wu's office, about the full day of dismantling and restructuring and deciding what to do with 11 years of careful construction that had turned out to be built on a foundation that could not hold what he was trying to put on it now. He went back into the room. She was awake. She was lying on her side looking at the door when he opened it, and she looked at him with the morning clarity of a person whose medication had worn off and whose assessment was fully operational. Woo, she said. Not a question. Yes. He sat back down. He'll have everything by end of week. The clean exit for Celine takes 2 weeks. She nodded slowly. And Minjun? Gone, he said. He won't come back. You're sure? He burned his position, his protection, and his safety in one move. He has nothing left to gain from the city. He paused. He made his calculation. He'll live with it. She was quiet for a moment. What happens to the people who depended on your operation, she said, when you dismantle the parts that need dismantling? He looked at her. It was not the question he had expected. It was also precisely the right question, the one that indicated she had been thinking about the actual human architecture of what he was describing rather than just its effect on the two of them. Some of them find other arrangements, he said honestly. Some of them I can move into legitimate structures. I've been building some of those already over the past few years. It's not... He stopped. It's not nothing, what I've built. Some of it is real. Some of it employs people and generates actual value. That part survives. The other part, he exhaled, the other part has been surviving on things that aren't clean, and it stops. Because of the exposure. Because of the exposure, he said. And because, he looked at the monitor, at the numbers. Because I am not willing to have her grow up with that shadow. And I understand, finally, that there is no version of maintaining it that doesn't produce that shadow. Nia looked at him. She looked at him for a long time with the morning light coming through the hospital window and the city doing its work outside it. You've known that for a while, she said. Not accusation. Observation. I've been approaching it for a while, he said. Approaching is not the same as arriving. What made you arrive? He didn't answer immediately. He looked at the monitor, then at his hands, then at her. The heartbeat, he said, in the exam room, the first time I heard it. He paused. And then you in the chair in your apartment, the rocking chair you painted, the instruction booklet with the coffee ring. He stopped. A lot of small things that added up to the same thing. She looked at him. Something in her face shifted. Not breaking. Nia did not break. That was not the shape of her. But releasing, the way a muscle released after being held contracted for too long, the specific relief of something that has been working very hard being allowed to stop. I painted it because the original color was this terrible brown, she said. The previous tenant left it. I couldn't afford to replace it, and I didn't want to ask anyone for help, so I bought a can of paint and did it in an afternoon, and it looked worse after. It didn't look worse. The original color shows through in 3 places. I know. He paused. It looked like something you made yours. She looked at him. She looked at him and did not say anything for a moment, and then she said very quietly, I want to go home. Today? The doctor said if the contractions don't return overnight, I can go home this morning. She shifted slightly against the pillow. I want to go back to my apartment. I want the security assessment finished properly, not by someone with a second agenda. And I want to go home, and I want to sleep in my bed. Okay, he said, and I want you to come. He was still. Not permanently, she said. Not as a statement, just, I don't want to be alone in that apartment with the knowledge of what was in it. Not yet. I need... She stopped. She pressed her lips together. This part was costing her, and she was paying it anyway, which was the most Nia thing she had done in 3 weeks. I need someone else in the building while I figure out how to make it feel like mine again. I'll sleep on the couch, he said. Yes, she said. You will. There was almost a smile. From both of them, almost simultaneously, the almost smile of people who are not quite there yet, but can see the distance and have decided it is crossable. The doctor discharged her at 10:15. The contractions had not returned. The baby's position was good. The instructions were rest, reduce stress, follow up in 72 hours. The doctor said them to Nia and looked at Jihuan when she said the reduced stress part, and he held her gaze and nodded once, and she appeared to accept that as sufficient. He brought the car to the entrance. He helped her in without making it into a production, a hand, steady, no commentary, and she accepted it without making it into a statement. The drive back to Crestline was quiet, not uncomfortable quiet. The quiet of 2 people who have run through so much in the last 12 hours that ordinary silence feels like something earned. The push-pull door. She did it herself and he let her, following through behind her, and they went up 4 flights in a building that smelled like old carpet, and someone's cooking from the 3rd floor, and she unlocked her apartment and went in first and stood in the middle of it and looked around. The security team had come through again that morning. Jihuan had sent different people with no connection to anyone who had been inside the original operation. And the apartment was clean. The devices were gone. What remained was hers, the calendar on the wall, the notebook on the counter, the partially assembled crib in the corner, the rocking chair with the white paint showing the brown through in 3 places. She stood in the middle of it and breathed. He stood near the door and let her do that. After a moment, she moved to the rocking chair and sat down in it carefully, one hand on its arm and one hand on her stomach, and she rocked it once, the small back and forth of a person testing whether something still holds. And it held. "The crib needs finishing," she said. "I can do that." "You don't know how." "There are instructions." She looked at him from the rocking chair. He was still near the door, coat still on, and she looked at him with the specific expression she had developed over the past 3 weeks. The one that was still running the assessment, still checking, but where the calculation had shifted from whether to trust him to how much and in what ways and at what pace. "Take your coat off," she said. He took his coat off. "The instructions are under the coffee ring," she said. "Don't lose the hardware. Last time I lost 3 of the bolts and had to improvise." He moved to the crib. He picked up the instruction booklet. The coffee ring was on the cover and the pages were slightly warped from humidity, and someone, her, had made pencil marks on several of the diagrams, small annotations of steps that had been confusing. He looked at the marks and thought about her sitting alone with this instruction booklet, working through it methodically, annotating the parts that didn't make sense, in this apartment with its push-pull door and its broken buzzer panel. He sat cross-legged on the floor next to the partially assembled crib and started reading. She rocked gently in the white-painted chair and watched him and did not say anything. The apartment was quiet. Through the window, the city did what it always did, which was keep moving regardless of what happened inside any given room. And inside this room, a woman rocked in a chair she had painted herself, and a man sat on the floor reading instructions for a crib. And it was ordinary in the way that things were ordinary when they had cost enough to finally become real. He stayed 3 days. He slept on the couch the first night and the second. And on the 3rd morning, she came out of the bedroom and found him already up, coffee made, the crib fully assembled in the corner with all its hardware correctly installed, and a small stuffed animal. He had gone out early, apparently, while she was sleeping, sitting in the center of it. She stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the crib and then at him, standing at the counter with a coffee cup, watching her. "Where did you get that?" she said, meaning the stuffed animal. "The pharmacy on the corner," he said. "They had a small selection. It was either that or a duck." "It's a rabbit." "Yes." She looked at the rabbit in the assembled crib. She pressed her lips together. She was not going to cry over a drugstore rabbit in an assembled crib. She was a practical woman who had spent 7 months managing alone, and she did not cry. She crossed the room and stood beside the crib and looked down at it. At the rabbit. At the assembled hardware that she had failed twice to make work. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome." She touched the side of the crib, ran her fingers along the rail. Their daughter would sleep here, in this small apartment on Crestline, in this room that used to be a living room before she'd rearranged everything to make space, with the city outside the window and the push-pull door 4 flights below. "Jihuan," she said. "Yes." She turned and looked at him. He was still at the counter, giving her the distance she hadn't asked for, but that he had learned over these weeks was the thing she needed, the space to arrive at things on her own rather than being brought to them. "I don't want to do this alone anymore," she said. She said it plainly, without architecture around it, the way she said things when she had decided that the cost of plainness was less than the cost of anything else. "I'm not saying everything is resolved. I know it isn't. I know there's a Thursday with Wu and 2 weeks of legal work and a structural dismantling that's going to take months, and I know that we have to figure out what we are in the middle of all of that." She stopped. "But I don't want to be the woman in this apartment alone at 2 in the morning, deciding whether the parked cars outside are ordinary cars." He set down his coffee cup. He crossed the room. He came to where she was standing beside the assembled crib, and he stood in front of her and she looked up at him with no wall left, just her face and what was in it, which was exhaustion and love, and the specific, undisguised expression of a woman who has decided she is done spending energy on distance that was never actually keeping her safe. He put both hands on her face, his thumbs along her cheekbones, holding her face lightly, the way a person held something that mattered. "I'm here," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." She put her hands over his, both of them warm and specific against the backs of his hands. "I know," she said. They stood like that for a moment. Just the standing, just the contact, in the small apartment on Crestline with the assembled crib between them and the city outside doing its relentless morning work. The following weeks had their own weight. Wu's Thursday was exactly what he had described. A full day, a significant amount, decisions that cost. Ji Huan sat in Wu's office and went through the architecture of 11 years piece by piece and made choices that were irreversible, and he made them without flinching, which did not mean they were painless. They were not painless. Some of them felt like removing a load-bearing wall. The knowledge that the structure would hold, but that it would look fundamentally different, and that there was no returning to the previous configuration. He told Nia about the Thursday when he came back. She listened at the kitchen table with her hands around her tea, and she asked the question she needed answered, and she did not pretend the cost was smaller than it was. "Are you okay?" she said when he had finished. He thought about it honestly. "I will be," he said. She looked at him. "That's the right answer," she said. Celine's documentation was completed at the end of the second week. Wu called on a Wednesday morning to confirm it was done. The connection severed, the records amended, the paper that Celine had requested placed in order and delivered. Ji Huan received the confirmation and sat with it for a moment. He thought about the warehouse and the two chairs and the specific quality of Celine's expression when she had said that Nia loved him. He thought about 8 years and 2 years and the calculation that had produced all of it, and he filed it in the category of things that were done. He told Nia, "It's finished," he said. She looked at him across the kitchen table. She had been home for 2 weeks now. The apartment was hers again, fully, and without the knowledge of devices or monitoring. The calendar on the wall, just a calendar. The notebook, just a notebook. She had gone back to the prenatal appointments. She had cooked badly and refused his attempts to improve the situation, and then eventually accepted one suggestion per meal as a compromise. She had let him stay, not on the couch anymore. That had lasted until the 4th night, when she had come out of the bedroom at 2 a.m. and found him awake. And she had sat at the other end of the couch, and they had talked until 4, and then she had fallen asleep there, and he had gotten a blanket from the closet and put it over her. And in the morning she had said without preamble, "You can sleep in the bed. It's a reasonable-sized bed, and you're sleeping badly on the couch, and I don't have the patience for unnecessary suffering." He had slept in the bed. On his side, with the particular deliberate awareness of someone who understood the significance of the arrangement, and she had slept on hers, and in the morning she had made tea and not said anything about it, which meant it would continue. "Finished," she said. She said the word like she was testing its weight. "What does that feel like?" "Strange," he said honestly. "Lighter. Strange." She nodded. She turned her teacup slowly in her hands. "I've been thinking about something," she said. "Tell me." "When she's born," she said. "The name." He was very still. "I haven't decided," she said. "I want to decide together, if that's—" She looked up at him. "If that's something you want?" "Yes," he said. It came out without any hesitation or management, just the word, just the yes, simple and complete. She almost smiled. The almost smile that had been appearing more frequently over the past 2 weeks, getting fractionally closer to becoming a full one each time. "Okay," she said. "Then we'll decide together." The morning she kicked for the first time with him present, not in the hospital, not in a moment of crisis, just an ordinary morning in the apartment, was a Saturday in the 5th week. They were at the window. It had become a habit, over the weeks, morning coffee, the window, the city doing its early morning version of itself, which was quieter and slower than its other versions, the street still learning the day. She had started standing there first, and he had joined her, and it had become the shape of their mornings without either of them deciding it would be. She was looking out at the street below. He was standing beside her, close enough that their arms were touching. She had her coffee in one hand and her other hand low on her stomach, the automatic gesture, and he had his coffee in both hands and was looking at the city. Then she made a sound. Quiet, sharp, involuntary. He looked at her. Her face had changed. Something moving through it. Not pain, not the pain face he had learned to dread. Something else. Something that cracked the morning open and let something warm come through. "Give me your hand," she said. He gave her his hand. She put it on her stomach and held it there. He felt it, under his palm. Unmistakable, specific, entirely deliberate. The movement of a person who has decided the time has come to be felt. A kick. Then another. Then a small, rolling shift, like someone turning over in a small space and finding a comfortable position. He looked at his hand on her stomach. Nia was looking at him. She was watching his face the way she had watched it in the exam room, looking for the unguarded version, the one without the management and the control. And it was there. It was entirely there. The same rawness as before, but different now, deepened by everything that had happened between that moment and this one. He looked up at her. Her eyes were wet, not overflowing. She was not a woman who overflowed, but present. The specific brightness of someone who has been holding something for a long time and has just, in this moment, allowed it to mean everything it means. "Hi," she said. She was not saying it to him. She was looking down at her stomach, at his hand, and she was saying it to their daughter. He thought about the crosswalk, the cold afternoon and the exhaust fumes and the moment the air left him. He thought about the push-pull door and the rocking chair and the coffee ring on the instruction booklet. He thought about the warehouse and the drive and the hospital room and the heartbeat on the monitor and all the costs that had been paid in all the directions they had been paid. He thought about 14 months of believing that distance was protection and what it had cost both of them, and what it had cost her alone in this apartment with her hand on her stomach and a calendar on the wall and a life she had built with her own hands to prove she could. He thought about the window they were standing at and the city below it that kept moving regardless, and the small apartment on Crestline with its push-pull door and broken buzzer panel and one assembled crib and one painted chair. He kept his hand on her stomach. She leaned her head against his shoulder, just resting it there. Just the weight of it. The specific and particular weight of a person who has decided to stop holding themselves upright entirely on their own. Outside, the city caught its morning light. Their daughter kicked once more and was still. The war was over.